If you asked me for a list of my favorite films, there's a pretty good chance I'll sing some song or another about Akira. Whether it's about its unmatched animation, the colors, attention to details, awe-inspiring landscape, the very soul behind its science fiction dystopian drip. If you asked me, however, my favorite animated film specifically, I would tell you it's tied with another. Another film, granted, that doesn't rival the sheer volume of frames per second in its animation, but something else that equally stuns me with its art direction, with its massive, intricate world, which leaves an experience best put simply as awesome. You already know from the title. The relatively more niche Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. For me, these are the two kings of animation. The, oh, you never saw it? We need to watch it sometime films. And by the way, if you haven't seen either, we should totally watch them together sometime. While Akira is based on a 6-volume manga series, a really good read too, I wish they'd adapt it into an anime so the latter 3 volumes could shine, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust is based on a light novel series. For the film, specifically the 3rd in the series. And to me, I always found that interesting. See, the style in Bloodlust was so distinct and beautiful. Every frame of it seemed to belong in, well, frames, as to be mounted on walls for display. I had assumed it might have been from a manga series as well, with how gorgeous it looks, but no. Light novels, which is to say just novels. You know, those papers that are mostly just words. Now, for a long time, I sort of just shrugged, thinking, well, that's interesting. Anyways, you haven't seen the film, you get the idea. Again, the film is beautiful. The characters are exceedingly more interesting than the ones in Akira, I find. The world seems post-apocalyptic, yet there are vampires, so we get sci-fi tech with classic gothic architecture. Chef's kiss. What a roller coaster ride of visuals. I was content with the film. Maybe disappointed there wasn't a book full of drawings as chilling and gorgeous as the film. I think that's why I put off picking up any of the books. Until, of course, the voices in my head said, hey, you haven't read the books? We should really read them together sometime. So, on a lark, I ordered a copy of the very first light novel in the series, the original Vampire Hunter D, written by Hideyuki Kikuchi. I have things to say about this. Either in anticipation of receiving the book or during my reading, I discovered there are some 40 of these books in the series. Not all by the original author, and not all following the same titular Hunter D, it looks like. But let's appreciate that. 40 of them! And this first one was over 200 pages. They're not short stories. Not from the glances I've made. But I'm not here to talk about the series at large. I want to talk about simply the book I read. By God, did I think the film was an experience. This book is my first experience with a light novel. Going in, I didn't fully understand what light novels were. Just hadn't ever touched them before. I thought maybe they were light reads that apparently had some pictures occasionally strewn in. I guess by definition, Fire and Blood is a light novel. But no. Turns out they're not necessarily light. I think of Vampire Hunter D as a novel. Calling it a light novel almost sells it short, I want to say, in my ignorant, short-sighted view. It's a full book, and to be honest with you, if we're selling a light novel on the appearance of drawings throughout it, I say there could have been more pictures in this one. Fire and Blood has more, for instance. But I'll get to the artwork inside of it at the end. We can, though, begin by addressing the cover, which I find equal to the imagery of the film's style that I had been going on about before. It's a ghostly, gothic style, a painting worthy of a wall. And if you pay close enough attention, the horse on the cover is cybernetic. Oh, where do I begin with all this? How about what the title of the video suggests? Yeah, let's get right into the crux of the matter. Vampire Hunter D is kind of dorky. Like, almost laughably so. Now, let me explain what I mean. I think in part, this assessment comes from the translation. We're talking about a language that apparently never had words for I love you until it encountered it in another tongue. This book was written in Japanese. I'm going to suspect maybe the writing style, which is what I charge to be dorky here, is presented like that because of translation. And yet, I almost hope not. I need to walk you through my experience here. That's what I've been doing this entire time, you see. I hold the film Bloodlust on quite the high pedestal. So much so, I hold it as an equal to Akira, the film that usually solos praise as the greatest of all time. So, consider if you have the energy. You're me. You love this film. You buy the book that started it all. It's got that artwork on the cover. It almost feels historic, important in some yet revealed literary reverence. You read the first 2 pages. Its description. The author's painting a scene, and it's good. I can really imagine the red sky, the cold fields, the horseman on the cover riding his horse down the dusty trail. He's got his hat hiding his face. I already know the badass under that hat, but here he is, he's riding, the stage is being set. Our vampire hunter lead encounters a young woman waiting on the road. There's a bit of a standoff. She's provoking him, wants to know if that giant sword he carries on his back is for show, or if he actually uses the thing. Our main character, oh, he's as stoic as they come. He's not fixing for the fight this woman is trying to offer. But then the woman drops off all her clothes. We're treated to our first page of art in the book here, actually. It's alright. It's the woman standing naked. Now, she does this to sort of catch our hero off guard, to get an attack in with the whip she's trained with. And you know, I can respect that as a tactic. That would take a lot of guys off guard. In fact, again, I can imagine the red sky and the lone hunter riding. I can picture this happening in the style of Bloodlust's animation easily. It's chutty to open your book with a woman showing off her body in the first few pages. Could have just cracked the whip. But alright. I already admit there was a point to it, and it does fit the vibe I'm literally coming in for. Now, she does this to test the traveler's abilities, to make sure that the sword on his back isn't in fact for show. She does this because she is looking for someone on the road. Anyone capable enough to go toe-to-toe with a vampire. A vampire who has left his mark on her neck. A vampire who means to turn her into a fellow creature of the night. This is how Doris Lang met the vampire hunter called Dee. And this is the entire plot of the book. Now this is a fantastic opening for telegraphing, here's the plot, any questions? And if you do have questions, that's chapter 2, here you go. But wait a second. Perhaps I have described this opening elegantly enough that you too could imagine this scene unfolding with a gorgeous art style akin to the animation found in Bloodlust. Perhaps you might think that's a solid setup, and though I've been brief about it, it sounds entirely promising, nothing dorky about it. Perhaps I'm using the word perhaps too frequently as I go on here. Perhaps that's the point I'm trying to make, because that's just one of the weird things the author employs in the writing of this book about hunting a vampire. Dear viewer, the writing is full of funny and weird shit. Take that opening I've described and layer it with weird shit like, with his words as her signal to start, the girl concentrated all her might into her right hand. Her power coursed down the whip to the tips, trying to send the youth sailing through the air. But it didn't! In fact, all 8 loops passed right through the youth's body without losing their cyclical form. Note the 2 exclamation points here, the wording, in fact. Again, I think this must be because of translation. But I read a translation and I want to talk about that aspect of it too. Let's summarize what I find weird about the writing. 1. The author is occasionally not confident in what is happening. 2. Flamboyant use of exclamation points. 3. Actual anime shit. So what do I mean? The author's not confident in what's happening. Well, let's review my emphasis on opening sentences with the word perhaps. There is an uncanny amount of occurrences where sentences open with or use the word perhaps. An event will happen in the book. Someone will make a decision. Sometimes it's very well explained. The reason Raigen-sai's tone was surprisingly calm was because the intruder had been right on all points but one, and he decided that putting up any more of a struggle would be futile. Alright, that's what I'd call confidence. Other times the writing leans in the other direction. Rather than the author telling the reader, here's why that happened, here's what led this character to deciding this. We're overwhelmed with vagueness. We get passages something like, perhaps it was because of the greed in his heart that the bad guy succumbed to this belief. Or perhaps it was because of Dee's superhuman abilities he was able to neo-dodge all of those lasers fired at him. Like you're writing the story. Just tell me. I mean, I can kind of see how this could work. Like sometimes writing something uncommitted, like perhaps it was this or perhaps it was that could hit harder under the right circumstances, especially in matters of internal conflict where even the characters aren't sure what's compelling them to make certain actions. But it is frequent. You find perhaps kicking off a paragraph after something happens. And I don't know if this is on the editor or the translator, but it happens often enough, you notice how often it happens. Page 68, we've got this passage. Perhaps it was some secret trick the Count employed in the timing, or the way he put his strength into the move. But for whatever reason, Dee was unable to take his hand off the hilt. The author is keeping us in the dark. Here's a line also in the spirit of this indecisiveness. Page 160, during Dee's fight with the mutant golem. Dee must have been aiming for that ever since he discovered the giant's flesh couldn't be cut. Must have. That's the author talking, not a character. It's weird. At page 178, we've got this passage. His words were unthinkably harsh for a father. But then, on the whole, the vampire race had extremely dilute notions of love and consideration compared to human beings. Quite possibly, it was this trait that had both led them to the heights of prosperity and guided them to their eventual downfall. The wording, quite possibly. I don't know, it just strikes me as weird. It is a good passage, but maybe it would have been stronger to say something like, many had argued it was for this reason. Because otherwise, it just seems like the author is bearing the uncertainty. Our second point of weird writing. The flamboyant use of the exclamation point. Before I read Vampire Hunter D, it was beyond the machinations of my imagination to envision seeing an exclamation point outside of a quotation mark for a character yelling, or someone angrily venting on the internet. It's just not something I ever encountered in a regular body of text. Because to read a paragraph where the author themselves ends an important revelation with an exclamation point, well, you'd think that's silly. And you'd be right! It is silly, and there are multiple occurrences of this in the book. Again, you'll read a passage. Why didn't this attack work on the character? Because they were already dead! Exclamation point. That's another thing, by the way. Point number 2.5. The narrator asks the author asks the reader questions. So you'll read a paragraph opening with, perhaps this is why that happened, by the unsure book. The book is so unsure, it asks you directly, what was in that vial? And what did the Count mean by that? Then you hit with a banger, because D is vegan! Exclamation point. No joke. This is how Vampire Hunter D reads. Perhaps he was a virgin. Did he have to comment in the comment section? Yes! The guy who uploaded this video is an idiot! Exclamation point. The guy read several chapters of this book before realizing the medium of anime can exist in a novel. I don't mean manga. And that is what this book is. It's anime. It's anime in text form. Anime written out. Manga without the pictures. Point number 3. All the weird anime shit. I am not telling high tales. There's a character in this book that can flash step. The author takes a paragraph to stop a fight, which spans 15 seconds, to explain how the guy is using his flash step ability. And Dee shuts his eyes and cuts him down, just like how I'd expect Jotaro to wiggle himself out of a sticky situation. Not by punching here, but, using a clever trick of their own. So you get that and other crazy powers throughout the text. Don't forget we open with a woman taking her clothes off on the road. Like, who do you imagine we're trying to excite? Someone that probably likes anime. All this considered, you start to see how Vampire Hunter D comes off as a dorky read. And everything I've gone over, It just keeps reappearing and complementing one weird aspect with another. Having come from the film that I love to read all this, my expectations, I was very mixed reading this book. I expected something, I don't know, as sophisticated and brilliant as what I saw in the form of film. Like, that's not exactly what I got here. But I've beat around the bush long enough. Despite everything I've said, no, especially because of what I've said. I loved this book. This dorky translated book about vampires. I loved it. I mean, come on. I always talk about the ones I like. And of all the weird writing, it grows on you. It really does. I mean, if something makes you smile, even if it's because it's dumb or cheesy, is that something bad? It made you smile. How can you chalk that up to being something bad? And this book, through these I guess we'll call them tropes, it made me smile a lot. Like, do you want to know what this book really is? If not anime, if not a love letter to Bram Stoker's Dracula and other vampire media. I mean, it absolutely is that. The Count is named Count Lee. It's an obvious reference to Christopher Lee, who played Dracula. No. This book is Resident Evil 4. In terms of camp and cheese, this is it. This is precisely how I want the novelization of Resident Evil 4 to read. A celebration of campiness. It took some adjustment to realize what I was reading, that it wasn't the film, but afterwards, I had fun with this. There's a werewolf in the book, too. Of course there's a werewolf. Here's a passage with him in it. Terror stole into Lamika's expression. In a twinkling, the distance between them closed to where she was within sword's length of him. And then... Ow! Or this line. Rawr! The werewolf snarled at Greco. It's written out like that. This book doesn't treat itself like high art because it's really not. So what about the characters in all of this? We might say the characters in this story are archetypical. A stoic, mysterious wanderer, a damsel, a vampire called the Count, a sheriff, a caring old doctor, and corrupt town officials. There's not a massive cast, but there is a memorable one, and I must stress a dynamic one. Putting the aforementioned cheese aside, I have to give my praise for how fluid the characters are with one another. Their motives, their allegiances. They'll change their minds and make new deals with one another. First, we have our main character, D. He is a vampire hunter, but he's also a dhampir, meaning he's half vampire, and possesses several vampiric powers. By his nature, he's explained to sort of exist in the twilight between the world of man and the night ruled by the vampires. Seen as a monster by the people he helps, and seen as a traitor by the vampires he's physically more related to. In this story, his role is simple. He accepts to hunt down the vampire stalking Doris Lang in order to prevent her from being turned into a vampire by him. Hunters appear to be cold and materialistic in this setting. He gives her the condition his only interest is killing the Count, and that he doesn't care about all the people who are going to want to save their skin and throw her into an asylum for already being bitten. There's a lot of mistrust for those who survive the first feeding, so people are becoming cold with Doris. That said, Dee's kind of a sweetheart. He still looks out for her when outside factions move in on her. And that's what's truly great about the story of Vampire Hunter D. These outside actors. See, the young and beautiful Doris isn't just the item of desire for the Count. She's got another sleazy admirer, the mayor's son, Greco. He wants to marry Doris, and over the course of the story, his desperation to see this realized brings him to more depraved depths. After he's shoved off earlier in the story, he comes back with a posse to Doris's ranch, and he effectively forces it out into the open, that Doris is concealing the bite mark on her neck, all because of his first rejection. Then by the end, well, he does a lot of other bad stuff to up his favor with her. But to his credit, to Greco's credit, he makes a move against the Count about halfway through, and you'd think that's brave, but you remember his shallow motives, and there's a sleazy sort of catch to what he does, or what he allowed to happen, rather. I almost thought he might have an arc coming to the rescue at one point, but the author doesn't seem to let him have one. He's not that nuanced. But there's the love triangle, or corner, the love corner, I should say, with Greco and the Count both wanting to make Doris. They both want Doris to. Then, of course, Dee, who is described as being supernaturally handsome. He has her attention. Doris is like catching a thing for Dee. But we're not done. We're not done there, because the Count's vampiric daughter, she catches the hots for Dee, and she just wants to flat out kill Doris while she's at it, because it's against her father's wishes. So there's a conflict between father and daughter there. She doesn't want a lowly human to be raised to the nobility, and that's what the vampires are called, by the way. They're called the nobility, which is pretty cool. But it's not just love drama here, because we have my favorite character, the despicable Rai Ginsai. That's how I'm pronouncing the name. He's another outside actor mixed up into all of this. See, he's a mutant bandit, a mutated bandit, described as also being incredibly good looking, and legitimately he is the wicked sense of humor, Mr. Hickey from the Terror kind of cunning bad guy. Of course, he's got an anime ability of his own, but it's a really cool one, and he also reinforces the dynamic flow I was getting at with the cast. This is why I love this guy. This guy is such a bastard. He never stops scheming for like a minute. Like, when he effectively gets mogged by Dee early on, he's quick to team up with the Count, because he's a bitch. He gets all his minions killed first, too, to cut loose ends, because he kind of figures, like, well, if I get turned into the nobility, they're going to be like a loose end. So he gets his minions killed, and he even tries to cut a new deal with Dee when things don't go his way later in, and after that, he's willing to work with Greco, and neither one trusts the other, so their scenes together are just delicious. On that note, yeah, we switch perspectives up quite a lot in this story. I'd hardly afford Dee half the book. Like, Doris gets considerable chunks. Sometimes we cut to Greco, to Ginsai, or the Count for a cheesy scene, talking about his intent to destroy Dee. It's so campy. Like speaking of the cheese, like, one turn of phrase I adore is when, like, characters refer to the next life. Like, they say they call it the hereafter. You can think of what you've done in the hereafter. How about you? Like, the book is schlock at times, but it never ever tastes bad. Okay. I should concede it isn't perfect. Let me level my genuine criticism. My biggest one is the character of Doris. We open on how she's trained with a whip, and she's pulling some daring tactics to find a worthy hunter to hire and protect her. It's addressed in the book how, because she falls in love with Dee, more or less, she's never going to be quite as independent as she once was. Like, she's got a younger brother, right? He's a great kid. And Dee makes him promise he won't ever make his sister cry, basically saying, hey, take care of her, you'll be stronger than her when you're older. Granted, the book ends on this note, and the way it does it, I really do love it. It goes, Dee kept his promise, now it was the kid's turn. It's sweet, but this idea of Doris and how she's played to be a damsel, call it a generic fantasy trope, but I wasn't too impressed. She's a tough rancher. It's just her and her brother. She's running the ranch. Like, playing her to become soft like that, to become more dependent, I don't know. Rubbed me the wrong way. I feel something greater could have been done with her. My other issue concerns the art in the book. The whole thing which defines it being classified as a light novel. There wasn't really that much of it. Like, you forget they're even in the book until suddenly, hey, a drawing pops up. But the drawings don't compare to anything on the cover. Frankly, the book would have fared just fine without them. At most, they're okay. But being okay and infrequent, I wonder about the point of them. Like, sure, I appreciate the extra mile. The Midwich Medusa picture, like, that's one of my favorites, though you can note how much darkness excuses the actual drawing. Like, there's a lot of avoidance of, like, getting a really detailed face, really, something really nice. Like, I don't know. I guess you can call me disappointed. The cover is pretty. The movie, albeit a later product, it suggests a source of material full of rich art. And the art is just, it's okay. It's here and there, right? I had hoped for something more spectacular. Something that was, like, a little more avoidant of going, here's a bunch of black, like, give me some art. Before I tie up my thoughts, I'll swing back to praise and talk about the setting, which reflects everything I said, since it's very mixed. The book takes place in, bam, what do you know, in the year 12,000 or something like that, far future. In this world, Y2K basically went down. The world nuked itself in 1999, and Chapter 2 is dedicated to explaining the history, and I like that. We get our intro, we get the intro, they meet the characters, you grasp what's going on, you get a grasp of it, you get there's vampires, and Chapter 2 lays out the bigger picture. That's a nice like approach. I like that. I think Vampire Hunter D is the largest offender of genre splicing I have ever seen. It's not just a book about vampires. We're in the far future, so we got science fiction elements. The majority of the monsters employed by the vampires were made, most of them, were made from their super science. And because we're set so far after the end of the world, civilization, it has rebuilt itself. And it feels like it's fallen a second time. Well afterwards. So like civilization, it's healing. We've got the frontier, which means horses, sheriffs, ranches, cowboys. Vampire Hunter D, the setting is vampires, cowboys, and science fiction.
Genre mixing alert.
That sounds terrible, but it really does own it. What lore we do get explained is interesting. It's like, hey, mankind has nuked itself. Who better to appear and rebuild than the immortal vampires? The vampires, they build their own civilization in the wake of the destruction. The author had to explain all of Fallout's lore, happened, just to justify the explanation of vampires rising in their setting. That's hilarious to me. And they're on their way out, too. The book mentions several times their glory days are over with. So there's an entire civilization between us and what's effectively present day for the setting. That's cool. I feel I've covered everything. There's other stuff. I didn't even talk about Dee's left hand, or who he's supposed to really be. As I said, it's not high art. It's another take on Dracula with other genres and anime hijinks mixed into the bowl. And because of that, I'd say it's better than the original Dracula. I'd much rather read this than 50 pages of letters between Victorian women. Sorry, first 4 chapters of Dracula. This has got you beat. I've already got the next book, and I'm about 60 pages in, and I'm still seeing perhaps in this, but that one's looking not too bad. It's reminding me of the girl with the dragon tattoo. There's a mystery to this one going on. So I'm gonna read up to at least the 3rd one, since that's the one Bloodlust was based on. So I've got my homework. I do recommend reading Vampire Hunter D, because I recommend you should have some fun in your life. If you haven't read it before, we should totally read it together.